Why was everyone staring at her like she'd said something forbidden? The sound of the morning drill filled the dusty training ground, boots striking earth, orders echoing, metal clinking from weapon racks. Yet for a moment, everything went still. Elena Rodriguez stood motionless beneath the rising sun, her hands clasped behind her back, eyes steady on the man in front of her. "Repeat that, Rodriguez," Sergeant Patterson asked, squinting under his brimmed cap. "I'd like to request a rifle, sir." Her voice didn't waver, calm, measured, certain. The air changed. A few recruits exchanged glances. Then the first laugh broke, short, sharp, nervous. A ripple of amusement rolled through the lineup. Someone whispered something about her thinking she was in a movie. Another chuckled, maybe she thinks this is Call of Duty. Elena didn't flinch. She'd been through 4 weeks of basic training without saying much. Always early, always precise, never loud. Her instructors said she was disciplined. Her peers said she was strange. But no one could quite figure her out. She wasn't the loud type who bragged about push-ups or marksmanship scores. She wasn't here to prove anything, at least not to them. But today, she had asked for something that broke the invisible rule of conformity. Recruits didn't request, they obeyed. Sergeant Patterson's heavy boots shifted in the dirt as he crossed his arms. "Rodriguez, this is basic firearms training. We start with sidearms, everyone does. You'll get your turn with rifles later in the program." "Yes, sir," she said softly, "but I believe I would benefit more from rifle training today." The murmurs grew louder. One recruit, Davis, let out a low whistle and shook his head. "Oh, this'll be good," he muttered. "Let's see if she even handles the recoil without falling over." The laughter that followed was half mocking, half curious. Elena could feel their eyes on her, weighing her confidence against her size, her calm against their noise. Inside, her pulse was steady. Outwardly, she was stone. Sergeant Patterson wasn't a cruel man, just old school. He'd seen hundreds of young hopefuls try to outsmart the process, thinking they were born naturals. Most weren't. Most failed. Still, there was something in her voice, a quiet assurance that didn't sound like arrogance. He studied her eyes. They weren't the eyes of a show-off. They were old somehow, weathered. "Rodriguez," he said finally, "you got any experience with rifles? Any reason you think you're ready for one?" "Yes, sir." He waited for her to elaborate. She didn't. Silence stretched. A few recruits laughed again, the sound awkward against the weight in the air. Sergeant Patterson scratched his chin, then gestured toward the weapon racks. "You know what? Against my better judgment, let's give you what you asked for. But when you can't handle it, you go back to handguns like everyone else. No arguments." Elena nodded once. "Deal, sir." Patterson motioned to the armory tech. "Bring out an M4 carbine." When the rifle came out, gleaming in the sun, the laughter died down a little. The recruits gathered closer, sensing that something unusual was about to happen. Even Patterson seemed unsure why he'd said yes. Maybe he just wanted to prove a point. Maybe he wanted to humble her. He handed the weapon over, but as he did, his brow furrowed. Elena took the rifle like someone greeting an old friend. No fumbling, no hesitation. She checked the chamber, the safety, the sights, every movement clean, practiced, exact. Her grip was textbook perfect. The kind of perfection you don't see in beginners. "Where'd you learn to hold it like that?" Patterson asked quietly. Elena looked at him. "At home, sir." The sergeant opened his mouth to ask more but decided against it. "Fine. You get 5 rounds, then you hand it back." The recruits shifted behind her, whispering bets, smirking, waiting. She stepped up to the firing line. The target was 100 meters out, farther than the others were shooting that day. Sunlight shimmered across the range, heat already rising from the dirt. Elena adjusted her stance, exhaled, and brought the rifle to her shoulder. She could feel it, the way the weapon balanced, the way the weight settled into her body. The sound of her breath filled her ears, and behind that, a faint echo from years ago, a calm voice saying, "Patience, Mija. Let the world go still before you pull." Her finger found the trigger. Crack! A single sharp echo. The recoil hit her shoulder, but her body didn't move. Downrange, a perfect hole appeared in the center of the target. For a heartbeat, no one spoke. "Lucky shot," Patterson muttered, though there was a flicker of something in his tone, not doubt, wonder. Alina chambered the next round. Crack, another crack, crack, crack. Each time the same smooth motion, the same unbroken focus. By the fifth shot, the target looked untouched. All 5 bullets had passed through the same hole. Silence blanketed the firing line. The only sounds were distant pops from other recruits' pistols, off-center, scattered, sloppy. Patterson lowered his binoculars slowly. His face, once hard with skepticism, had softened into disbelief. "Rodriguez," he said finally, his voice low, "where did you learn to shoot like that?" Alina engaged the safety, lowered the rifle, and turned to face him. "My grandfather taught me, sir." He blinked. "Your grandfather must have been one hell of a teacher." "Yes, sir," she said quietly, "he was." By lunch, everyone on base had heard about the girl who split a bullseye 5 times. Recruits who had laughed that morning now avoided her eyes. Some came to ask questions, trying to sound casual. "Hey, Rodriguez, that was pretty wild shooting. How long you been practicing?" "Since I was 8, she said simply. They nodded awkwardly and left her alone after that. But her performance hadn't just caught the attention of her peers. Word had spread up the chain of command, through instructors, through departments, until it reached an office where a man in a decorated uniform leaned back in his chair and said, "Rodriguez, huh? Let's keep an eye on that one." That night, while others joked in the barracks, Alina sat quietly on her bunk cleaning the M4. The scent of oil filled the room, her motions rhythmic, meditative. She thought of her grandfather, Carlos Rodriguez, the man who taught her how to live by silence, how to move with purpose, how to breathe between thoughts. He had never bragged about anything, never raised his voice, but his lessons had weight, the kind that stayed with you long after the noise stopped. She could still see him under the Montana sky, teaching her how to read wind through the movement of the grass, how to feel distance rather than measure it. He'd always said, "The rifle doesn't care who you are, Alina. It only listens to patience." Back then, she never questioned why he took her training so seriously. To her, it had just been their way of spending time together, quiet afternoons, distant targets, the smell of gun oil and pine. But now, as she sat in her military bunk surrounded by strangers, she began to wonder. Who exactly had taught her? And why had he been so insistent on precision, on discipline that went beyond hunting or sport? 2 days later, Sergeant Patterson called her aside. "Rodriguez," he said, lowering his voice, "you've been reassigned." Alina blinked. "Sir." "You're moving into advanced marksmanship. Sergeant Martinez is expecting you at 600. Don't make me regret bending the rules for you." She nodded. "Understood, sir." Patterson hesitated, then added quietly, "You remind me of someone I served with once." He had that same look, calm when everyone else was panicking. "Be careful with that, Rodriguez. Calm can scare people." "Yes, sir," she said. As she walked away, Patterson watched her go. Something about her unsettled him, not in a bad way, but in a way that made him think about things he hadn't thought about in years. Advanced training was a different world. The instructors didn't yell as much. They didn't need to. Everything was quieter, sharper, more deliberate. Alina learned to shoot standing, kneeling, prone, at moving targets in low light in simulated storms. Every drill was a test of focus. Every mistake a lesson in humility. Yet no matter how they pushed her, she adapted. She wasn't the fastest, she wasn't the strongest, but her mind, her calm, was unbreakable. During one field exercise, Sergeant Martinez stood behind her as she adjusted her scope at 300 meters. "Rodriguez," he said, "how do you make it look so easy?" She didn't look up. "It's not easy, sir, I just breathe slower." Martinez smiled faintly. That's what every good shooter says before they're promoted. Her fourth shot hit the center ring again. When the exercise ended, he called her over. "You ever think about why you're so comfortable behind a rifle?" She paused. "It feels familiar, sir, like home." "Home," he echoed. "Yes, sir." Martinez studied her face. There was no bravado there, only truth. He nodded slowly. "Keep that answer to yourself. Some people won't understand it." That evening, as the sun sank behind the training hills, Alina sat alone by the range. The others had gone to dinner, but she stayed, watching the horizon fade into orange and blue. A soft breeze moved through the grass, whispering faintly, almost like her grandfather's voice. She thought about the way the recruits had laughed that first day, about how quickly they'd changed their tone once the target came back. But more than pride, she felt something else, a flicker of unease. Because as impressive as her performance had been, even she didn't fully understand it. Sometimes, when she held a rifle, her hands moved faster than her thoughts, her instincts anticipating the wind, her breathing syncing with something older, deeper. It wasn't talent, it was memory. And buried somewhere in that memory was a truth her grandfather had never shared. She didn't know it yet, but the mark of that truth was already written on her family name. As darkness settled over the training camp, a single star blinked through the clouds. Alina lifted her gaze to it, exhaling softly. She didn't know why the rifle felt like a piece of her soul. She only knew that the day she asked for it, something had shifted, something that couldn't be undone. Somewhere, buried in classified files and faded photographs, her grandfather's legacy was waiting to be discovered. And soon it would come looking for her. Sometimes silence hides the loudest stories. Why was the general here, at basic training? The rumor started just after sunrise. An unmarked jeep had rolled through the outer gates, and someone swore they'd seen a brigadier's insignia glinting on the uniform of the officer inside. Generals didn't visit places like this, not unless something unusual was happening. By noon, Alina was already on the range, running wind drift drills under Sergeant Martinez's supervision. She adjusted for crosswind, squeezed the trigger, and watched the target shudder. 2 inches high, Martinez called. Adjust your hold. She corrected, fired again, and this time the round struck dead center. Martinez lowered his binoculars. You ever miss Rodriguez? Alina smiled faintly, still looking downrange. Sometimes, sir, just not today. He grinned at that, but before he could reply, a quiet murmur spread among the observers. The sound of tires on gravel, then boots, polished ones. Every instructor on the line snapped to attention. Brigadier General Patricia Hawthorne stepped out of the jeep. Her posture was the kind that carried history, shoulders straight, eyes sharp, the kind of woman who'd been obeyed on every continent. The silver in her hair only made her seem more dangerous. Sergeant Martinez, she said, her tone even but unmistakably authoritative. I'm told you have a recruit who's been attracting attention. Yes, ma'am. Martinez's voice dropped half an octave. Private Alina Rodriguez. The general's gaze followed his gesture until it landed on Alina, still standing at the firing line, her rifle resting against her shoulder. Let me see what all the fuss is about, Hawthorne said. The range went silent again. Alina swallowed, nodded once, and took her position. Targets were reset, 100, 200, 300 meters. The air hung heavy with expectation. Rodriguez, the general called. 5 rounds per target, your discretion. Alina's pulse slowed. The world narrowed to the sight picture and the sound of wind brushing through grass. She fired once, then again. At 100 meters, perfection. At 200, the same. At 300, she adjusted slightly for wind and elevation. fired and watched the target barely tremble, all shots inside a space no bigger than a hand. When the final echo died, Hawthorne stepped forward, peered through the scope, and said nothing for a long time. Then she whispered to herself, almost too softly to hear, "That grouping, no coincidence." The debriefing was short. Everyone dismissed except Alina. "Rodriguez," Hawthorne said, "walk with me." They crossed the training grounds in silence. The general's boots crunched on gravel. Alina's heartbeat filled the quiet. Inside a small office, Hawthorne closed the door. Her tone softened slightly, but her eyes stayed searching. "Tell me about your grandfather." Alina hesitated. "Carlos Rodriguez, ma'am. He raised me on our farm in Montana. He served in the army, but he never spoke about it." Hawthorne leaned back, studying her. "Did he have a tattoo? A mark, maybe an emblem?" Alina blinked, surprised. "Yes, ma'am, a black bird, wings spread. I asked once. He said it was from his army days." Something changed in the room. The general went still. She reached into her pocket, pulled out her phone, and scrolled until she found a photo. She turned the screen toward Alina. "Like this." Alina's breath caught, the same bird, talons outstretched, stylized and sharp. "Yes, ma'am," she whispered. Hawthorne lowered the phone slowly. For the first time since arriving, her voice lost its official precision. "Rodriguez," she said quietly. "That mark belonged to a unit that doesn't officially exist." Alina frowned. "What do you mean?" "It was their insignia," the general said. "A covert team active during the Vietnam War. Their missions are still classified. They were called Black Talon." The words hung between them, heavy and electric. Alina searched the general's face, trying to gauge if this was a test or a story. But Hawthorne looked dead serious, maybe even haunted. "Your grandfather," she continued, "served in that unit. Carlos Rodriguez was one of their finest. He went by the call sign Eagle Eye." Alina felt something shift inside her, as if all the years she'd known her grandfather had suddenly rearranged themselves into a different picture. "My grandfather was Special Forces." "More than that," Hawthorne said. "He was one of the best snipers our military ever produced." That night, Alina couldn't sleep. The barracks were dark, the rhythmic snores of exhausted recruits mixing with the hum of ceiling fans, but her mind was louder than any of it. Black Talon. She'd never heard the name before, but the way Hawthorne had said it, like an invocation, made her skin prickle. She thought of her grandfather's hands, the way they had steadied hers when she was 8, teaching her to breathe between heartbeats. She thought of the old scar on his left palm, the way he always wore long sleeves when neighbors came by. Had he been hiding a story or protecting her from it? She remembered one winter night, years ago, when she'd asked why he looked so sad after fixing the old rifle. He'd stared into the fire and said quietly, "Some tools remember the hands that used them." At the time, she thought he meant it poetically. Now she wasn't so sure. The next morning, Hawthorne called her to a small conference room. Another officer was waiting, tall, lean, with eyes that seemed to weigh everything they saw. "Rodriguez," Hawthorne said, "this is Colonel James Mitchell." Mitchell extended his hand. "Carlos Rodriguez's granddaughter. I've waited a long time to meet you." His grip was strong but respectful. Alina noticed the faint scars on his knuckles, the way he moved, like someone who'd lived too long with awareness of threats. "Please sit," he said. A folder lay open on the table, filled with black and white photographs, soldiers in jungle fatigues, faces blurred by time. Mitchell tapped one image. "That's your grandfather, Vietnam 1971. Alina leaned forward. The man in the photo was young, almost unrecognizable, confident, rifle slung across his chest, standing with 3 other men. "This mission," Mitchell said, "was declassified last year. Their objective: eliminate a high-value target operating deep in enemy territory, impossible terrain. no air support. He flipped to another photo, the same group, later, standing beside a helicopter. One of them was bandaged, the others muddy and exhausted but alive. "Your grandfather made an 847-meter shot," Mitchell said. "Longest confirmed kill of the war, using equipment that should have made it impossible. Then he stayed behind to cover his team's extraction." Elena looked up, her voice quiet. "He stayed behind alone." "For 3 days," Mitchell said. "Wounded, outnumbered. He saved their lives. When they found him, he was barely conscious but alive." Hawthorne placed another document before her, yellowed paper with typed text and an embossed seal. "His Medal of Honor citation," the general said softly. "Classified presentation. He never told anyone." Elena traced her fingers along the faded ink. Her throat tightened. "He taught me how to breathe," she whispered. "How to shoot without moving the barrel. I thought he was just meticulous." Mitchell nodded. "He wasn't just teaching you to shoot. He was passing down an entire doctrine: patience, observation, control. Those weren't hunting lessons, Rodriguez. That was tradecraft." The meeting ended, but Hawthorne stopped her at the door. "There's a reason I came here personally," she said. "We're rebuilding a modern precision operations program. We need people who understand instinct, not just training. People like your grandfather, people like you." Elena met her eyes. "You think this is fate, ma'am?" Hawthorne paused. "I think some legacies refuse to die quietly." That evening, Elena walked to the far edge of the base where the wind carried the smell of gun oil and dust. She stood on the berm overlooking the range where everything had begun, where laughter had turned to silence, where her life had quietly changed direction. The sky burned orange, then deepened into violet. She thought about choice, how fragile it seemed, yet how heavy it felt. She could stay a regular recruit, fade into the background, live an ordinary life. Or she could step into a shadow older than she was, a history written in silence and blood. The idea both terrified and thrilled her. Her grandfather had always told her, "Courage doesn't roar, Elena. Sometimes it just keeps breathing." She exhaled slowly, watching the last light fade. Somewhere inside her, something ancient stirred, not inherited pride but a quiet readiness. Maybe she'd been training for this moment her whole life. When she finally returned to the barracks, Davis, the recruit who'd laughed at her that first day, was waiting by the door. He rubbed the back of his neck awkwardly. "Hey, Rodriguez, listen, about before. I was out of line." Elena smiled faintly. "You were just honest, Davis." "Still," he said, "guess I didn't realize who I was standing next to." "Neither did I," she replied. He blinked, not sure what she meant, but she was already walking past him into the dim light of the hall. That night she dreamed of Montana, the sound of wind through the pines, the rhythm of her grandfather's voice counting heartbeats. When she woke, the dawn was gray, the world silent except for the slow hum of the bass coming to life. A new day and a decision waiting. She dressed, tied her hair back, and looked at herself in the mirror. For the first time, she saw not just a recruit, but the reflection of something older, the echo of a man who had once walked unseen through jungles half a world away. In her eyes the same steadiness, the same silence. Some legacies begin with laughter, some with a whisper, and some with a single mark on a soldier's skin, a black bird with open talons, waiting to fly again. Sometimes destiny doesn't call your name, it simply waits for you to aim. Why had she been given only 24 hours to decide? The words had echoed in her mind all night, louder than the generators outside her barracks. A choice, the general had said. But choices like this weren't really choices. They were crossroads, one direction leading back to safety, the other into something far darker and unknown. By dawn, Elena already knew her answer. She called the number Colonel Mitchell had handed her. The line picked up after a single ring. "This is Rodriguez," she said quietly. "I accept." The voice on the other end didn't ask for confirmation. It simply said, "You report to transport in 3 hours. Pack light." And that was that. No briefing, no farewell ceremony, just a silent order and a clock ticking down. She didn't tell anyone except Sergeant Patterson. When she found him outside the training ground, the morning sun still low, he was inspecting rifles for the next class. "Sir," she said softly, "I've been reassigned." He looked up surprised. "Already where?" She hesitated. "I'm not sure I can say." He studied her face for a long time, then nodded. "Figures. You've got that look about you, the kind that doesn't stay in one place for long." He extended his hand. "Rodriguez, I don't know what you're walking into, but I'll tell you something my old co told me. Real soldiers don't need noise to make an impact. They just need purpose." Alina shook his hand, her grip firm. "Thank you, sir." He gave a faint smile. "Make the most of it, and if you ever meet a general named Hawthorne again, tell her I still owe her a drink." She blinked, half smiling. "You know her." "Everyone who's been around long enough knows Hawthorne. She doesn't visit recruits for no reason. Be careful, Rodriguez. People like her only appear when something important is being built." 3 hours later, the transport plane lifted off. No destination printed on the orders. No insignia on the uniforms of the crew. Just silence, wind, and the dull hum of engines carrying her somewhere far from the ordinary world. Alina watched the clouds below, thinking of Montana, the fields, the quiet, her grandfather's steady voice teaching her to aim not at the target but through it. She remembered his words the day she'd left for basic training. "You'll find out who you are when the noise fades, not when it's loud." She understood that now. The aircraft landed at what looked like a mountain base, snow-dusted peaks in the distance, sharp cold air slicing through her lungs. A staff sergeant in black fatigues met her at the ramp. "Rodriguez." "Yes, sir." "Follow me, no questions." They drove along winding roads until a cluster of buildings appeared, modern, austere, surrounded by barbed wire and floodlights. The sign at the gate simply read, "Facility 47." Inside, everything was different. No yelling, no chaos. The silence was almost oppressive. Soldiers moved like ghosts, efficient, precise, eyes forward. She was given a small dorm room and a thin packet of papers labeled SOSB, Candidate Orientation. She scanned the first page. Special Operations Sniper Program. Below that, in smaller letters, "Only 1 in 10 complete the course. Those who do never speak of it." Her roommate arrived just before lights out, a woman about her age, half smiling, eyes sharp. "Sarah Chen," she introduced herself. "6 months in. You must be the new legend everyone's whispering about." Alina raised an eyebrow. "Legend?" Sarah grinned. "The farm girl who beat the range record in her first week. Trust me, word travels fast here." Alina sat on the edge of her bed. "So this is it, huh? The program." Sarah's tone softened. "This is where they strip everything you think you know and see what's left." At 500 the next morning, training began. They ran until their lungs burned, crawled through mud until the skin on their palms tore, carried 50-pound packs up frozen inclines until exhaustion blurred into numbness. By evening, Alina had lost track of hours, her uniform soaked through with sweat, her heartbeat pounding like war drums. That night, as she lay in the dark, Sarah's whisper cut through the silence. "You'll think about quitting," she said. "Everyone does." "Did you?" Alina asked softly. "Every day," Sarah replied. "But something kept me here, a name, a reason." Alina nodded in the dark. She understood that. Her reason had gray hair, calloused hands, and a scar across his palm. Weeks turned into months. Each day felt like breaking and rebuilding the same person. She learned to shoot in rain, wind, and darkness, balancing her weapon on uneven rocks, firing after running for miles with no rest. She learned to calculate wind drift in her head, to measure angles by instinct, to survive with nothing but a knife and willpower. Every night, she collapsed into her bunk, staring at the ceiling until the edges of her vision softened. Sometimes she dreamed of Montana. Sometimes of jungles she'd never seen, flashes of movement through trees, the smell of gunpowder and wet earth. It was as if pieces of her grandfather's memory were leaking into hers. One morning her primary instructor appeared, Master Sergeant Angela Torres, compact, steady-eyed, calm as carved stone. "Rodriguez," Torres said, studying her file. "Carlos Rodriguez was my teacher. You remind me of him." Elena froze. "You knew my grandfather." Torres nodded. "Knew him, learned from him, owed him my life." She paused. "But don't think that earns you special treatment. If anything, it means I'll expect more." "I wouldn't want less, ma'am." Torres smiled faintly. "Good, because the next phase will decide if you belong here at all." They trained at altitude. Thin air, frost biting at exposed skin, weeks of long-range shooting under conditions that stripped away everything but focus. Torres pushed her harder than anyone, made her shoot after sprinting, after crawling through snow, after being submerged in freezing water. "Eliminate excuses, Rodriguez," she'd say. "Your body lies, the wind lies, only the bullet tells the truth." Elena learned to listen to that truth. At night, she'd sit alone, hands trembling from exhaustion, and stare at the small photograph of her grandfather she kept folded in her pocket. "Was this what you wanted from me, Abuelo?" she thought. "Or did you hope I'd find peace where you never could?" Some nights she hated him for the path he'd carved into her life. Other nights, she felt nothing but pride. It was confusing, love and anger woven together in silence. 6 months in, she hit her breaking point. It happened during a mountain navigation test. She and Sarah were dropped deep in snow-covered terrain with minimal supplies and told to find their way back to base before nightfall. The storm came faster than expected, white-out conditions, visibility down to a few feet. They moved side by side, ropes connecting them. When Sarah slipped on the ice and fell, the rope jerked hard, almost dragging Elena down with her. Elena dropped to her knees, anchoring the line, teeth chattering. "Sarah," she shouted into the wind. "I'm okay," came the faint voice below. "Just can't climb." The drop wasn't fatal, but it was steep, a 10-foot fall onto a frozen slope. Elena tied the line around her waist and began to descend. "Don't be stupid," Sarah yelled. "They said no rescues." Elena ignored her. "They said no help," she muttered. "They didn't say no loyalty." She reached Sarah, hooked her arm under her shoulder and started the climb back up. Her fingers screamed with pain, her body shaking with cold, but she kept going inch by inch until they collapsed at the top. They made it back long after nightfall. Torres was waiting. "You broke protocol," she said, voice sharp. Elena stood straight despite the cold. "Yes, ma'am." "Why?" "Because she wouldn't have left me either." For a long moment, Torres said nothing. Then her tone softened. "Good, that's what I needed to know." That night, Sarah left a folded note on Elena's bunk. "You could have let me fall, I wouldn't have blamed you, but you didn't. That's what separates shooters from soldiers." Elena kept the note tucked inside the same pocket as her grandfather's photo. Months passed. Her body hardened, her instincts sharpened. But inside she wrestled with a question she couldn't shake. Was this about service or inheritance, duty or destiny? During one training lecture, Colonel Mitchell visited the class. He looked older than she remembered, more lined, but still fierce. "You want to know what separates a sniper from a shooter?" he asked the room. "A shooter hits what they aim at. A sniper hits what others can't even see because they understand patience, timing, and consequence." He looked directly at Elena when he said it. "Consequence, Rodriguez. Never forget that word. You carry it in every bullet." Later that night, She wrote those words down in her journal. 18 months into the program, Elena stood on the final qualification line. Snow falling, wind cutting across the valley. 6 targets, 600 meters each. She took her time, adjusted, fired. Every round hit dead center. When the final shot echoed, Master Sergeant Torres lowered her binoculars and smiled, a real, rare smile. "Congratulations, Rodriguez," she said. "You've earned your place." That evening in her quarters, Elena found an envelope waiting on her desk. Inside was a photograph, her grandfather, younger, standing beside a small group of soldiers. Scrawled on the back were 4 words in Colonel Mitchell's handwriting. "The tradition continues, J.M." She stared at it for a long time, her throat tight. For the first time since she'd arrived, she allowed herself to cry, quietly, without shame. The tears weren't for exhaustion, they were for understanding. Because now she knew what her grandfather had been trying to teach her all along. That precision wasn't about perfection. It was about peace, the kind found in control when everything else is chaos. She looked out the window at the mountains, the wind howling outside like a living thing. Her reflection in the glass looked older, calmer, scarred but certain. She whispered to herself, "You were right, Abuelo, patience isn't weakness, it's power." Sometimes strength isn't in pulling the trigger, it's in knowing exactly when not to. Why did the first mission feel more like a test than a deployment? The wind howled across the tarmac of the remote airfield as the transport plane idled in the distance. Elena stood beside her pack, her gear stripped down to essentials: rifle, sidearm, medical kit, and a silent mind trained to see everything and feel nothing, at least. That's what they told her to become. But she still felt, every heartbeat, every doubt. Master Sergeant Torres approached quietly, clipboard in hand. "Rodriguez, your orders are sealed. You'll open them after insertion." "Yes, ma'am." Torres studied her for a long moment. "This isn't training anymore. Out there you don't get do-overs. Every decision echoes." Elena nodded, understood. Torres softened slightly. "One more thing, don't let them turn you into a ghost. You're human, remember that." The words lingered long after Torres walked away. The transport plane climbed into the night sky. Through the small circular window, the world below vanished into shadow, only stars above, endless and cold. She read her sealed orders by red cabin light. Operation Deep Silence. Location, undisclosed. Objective, overwatch for reconnaissance team, confirm target movement. Engage only if hostile intent is verified. No mention of names, no context, just coordinates and protocol. Typical. She folded the orders neatly and looked around the dim cabin. 4 others sat nearby, the recon team. None spoke. Their faces were partially hidden beneath helmets and fatigue. One of them caught her eye, a woman maybe in her 30s with a calm intensity. She gave a slight nod. Elena nodded back. Sometimes that was enough. They landed hours later at a forward operating site carved into a canyon in the Middle East, a strip of dust surrounded by rock and silence. The briefing was short, the tone colder than the desert night. "Intel suggests a rogue weapons facilitator will be meeting with local insurgent commanders," the captain said. "You'll establish overwatch here, confirm visual, report movement. Rules of engagement: only fire if the team is compromised." Elena memorized the maps, the terrain contours, the escape routes. She'd trained for this 100 times, but training had never smelled like diesel and fear. They moved out before dawn. She and her spotter, Sergeant Miller, climbed to a ridge overlooking the rendezvous site. The hike was brutal, the air thin, her lungs burning. But when they reached the ridge, she felt that strange calm settle over her again, the same quiet that always came before focus. Through the scope, the world shrank to a circle of meaning. Below, shadows moved: trucks, figures with weapons, heat signatures flickering in the infrared. "Target area clear," Miller whispered. "Clock starts now." They waited. Hours passed. The sun burned overhead. Sweat stung her eyes, but she didn't blink. Her breathing slowed until it matched the desert wind. Then movement. 3 vehicles approached. Doors opened. Men stepped out, one of them in civilian clothes, expensive, confident. He moved like a man used to giving orders, not taking them. Miller adjusted his scope. "That's him," confirmed ID, the facilitator. Command's voice came faint through the earpiece. "Maintain visual. Do not engage unless team is compromised." "Copy." Alina steadied her rifle. Her crosshairs drifted over the man's chest, then paused. He was talking to someone, gesturing, pointing toward a small village just beyond the ridge. Through her scope, she could see children in the distance chasing a ball, unaware of the meeting happening nearby. Something twisted inside her. This wasn't just coordinates anymore. These were people. "Rodriguez," Miller whispered, "eyes up, team moving in." Down below, the recon team advanced, 3 shadows slipping through ruined buildings. Then one of the trucks shifted unexpectedly. A soldier stepped out, scanning with night vision. His beam swept dangerously close. Miller swore under his breath. "They're exposed if he looks left." Alina's finger rested on the trigger. Her pulse slowed. She had a window of 2 seconds. "Do it," her training said. "Wait," her instinct whispered. The beam shifted. 1 second. She exhaled and fired. The shot cracked through the silence, clean and final. The sentry dropped without a sound. The recon team froze for half a breath, then kept moving. "Good shot," Miller murmured. But she wasn't listening. Her mind was already running calculations: wind, distance, escape. She reloaded. "Team secure," came the voice in her earpiece. "Resume overwatch." Alina exhaled slowly. The adrenaline faded, leaving that familiar hollow quiet. The mission continued. The facilitator finished his meeting, unaware one of his guards lay dead meters away. When the recon team withdrew, the extraction was silent, flawless. By morning, the desert was empty again. At base, debrief was clinical. "Single engagement," said the commander, reading her report. "Confirmed hostile, clean operation, dismissed." That was it. No mention of the hesitation. No mention of the child who dropped his ball in the dust just as she'd pulled the trigger. That night she cleaned her rifle in silence. The metal gleamed under the dim light, reflecting her face back at her, calm, still, but not peaceful. She remembered her grandfather's voice. "A rifle is honest, Mija. It does what you tell it. The real question is, can you live with what you told it to do?" She closed her eyes. The memory stung more than the recoil. Over the following months, her missions increased: overwatch, reconnaissance, long-range precision. She became known for her steadiness under pressure, her silence under stress. They called her Hawkeye in the field, a nod to her accuracy, but also a subtle echo of something older. General Hawthorne's reports described her as disciplined, emotionally contained, and precise beyond expectation. But that precision came at a cost. She slept less, spoke less. Each mission etched another invisible mark into her. Then came the assignment that changed everything. Operation Iron Veil. She was sent to an undisclosed region in Eastern Europe. Mountains, pine forests, and rumors of rogue arms trading linked to the same network from her last mission. The objective sounded simple: neutralize the convoy leader before the weapons could reach enemy hands. But simplicity was a lie. They inserted at night, fog thick as breath. She and her spotter positioned on a rocky outcrop overlooking a narrow road. The convoy appeared just after midnight, headlights cutting through mist. Through the scope, she saw the target vehicle, a black SUV. She lined up the shot. And then something caught her eye. The driver, barely visible, young, maybe 20, the kind of face that didn't belong in a war zone. "Target confirmed," Miller whispered. "Take the shot." Her finger froze. "Rodriguez," he hissed, "take it." She exhaled. The crosshair trembled just slightly. "If you don't shoot, people die later. If you do, someone dies now." The moral calculus spun endlessly in her mind. Then another voice, faint, half memory, half echo. "Courage isn't pulling the trigger, Mija. It's knowing why you should." Her breathing steadied. She switched targets, aiming slightly higher to the commander standing beside the vehicle, the one giving the orders, the one responsible. She squeezed. The commander fell. The convoy panicked. Engines roared, men shouted, headlights flared across the trees. But the driver, the boy, survived. He threw open the door and ran. "Missed primary," Miller snapped. "Negative," Alina said softly. "Adjusted priority." They withdrew before the enemy could triangulate. The mission was technically a success, objective neutralized, but the report said otherwise. "Deviation from assignment," command noted. "Target substitution unauthorized." She was summoned to a private meeting. Colonel Mitchell waited in a dim office, the same folder with her name on it lying on the table. He didn't look angry, just tired. "You changed your shot," he said. "Yes, sir." "Why?" "He wasn't the threat," she replied quietly. "The man giving the orders was." Mitchell studied her for a long moment. "You know, your grandfather once did the same thing. Different war, same principle." Alina looked up. "He did." Mitchell nodded slowly. "During an operation in Vietnam, he refused to execute a secondary target when he realized it would compromise civilians. Command reprimanded him, but history vindicated him." He leaned back, eyes thoughtful. "I wondered if that blood still ran strong. Now I know." Alina didn't know whether to feel relieved or condemned. Mitchell continued, softer now. "War doesn't need more killers, Rodriguez. It needs people who remember what killing costs." She nodded, silent. Weeks later, she received a small envelope in her quarters. No sender, no signature, just one photograph inside. It was the black Talon insignia, the same mark her grandfather had borne, but below it, handwritten words. "Legacy isn't obedience, it's understanding." No one ever admitted sending it. But she didn't need to ask. That night, as she sat cleaning her rifle, Sarah Chen appeared at her doorway, newly reassigned to the same unit. "Still awake?" Sarah asked softly. "Can't sleep." Sarah stepped inside. "You heard they're talking about bringing back the name." "What name?" Sarah hesitated. "Black Talon." Alina froze. "That's not possible." "Apparently someone up top wants to revive a precision unit under that code name. Small teams, surgical missions." Sarah looked at her. "You think they'll ask you?" Alina stared at the rifle in her lap. "Maybe, but I'm not sure they should." Sarah tilted her head. "Why not?" "Because I still hear the echoes after the gunfire stops." Sarah gave a faint, sad smile. "Then you're exactly who they need." The next morning, Alina stood at the range, alone. The sun rose slowly over the horizon, painting the world gold. She loaded one round, took aim at a single target and paused. The rifle was steady, the air still. But she didn't fire. Instead, she lowered the weapon, whispering into the wind. "Not every target deserves a bullet." The echo carried softly across the valley, unheard, but not lost. Sometimes the truest mark of precision is mercy. Why was the summons stamped top secret? Eyes only when all she'd done was follow orders. The envelope waited on her bunk like a ghost. No sender, no emblem, just her name in black ink. She stared at it for a long moment before sliding a finger under the seal. Inside lay a single sheet. "Report to Hangar 6 at 400. Civilian attire. No electronics, no questions." That was all. Outside, night pressed against the window, quiet, cold, expectant. Sarah was asleep across the room, breathing evenly, unaware that something in their world was about to shift again. Elena folded the letter and tucked it into her sleeve. She didn't know whether this was promotion or punishment, only that it felt like both. The hangar was dark except for a single overhead bulb casting long shadows across the floor. Two figures waited near a small aircraft, General Hawthorne and Colonel Mitchell. Hawthorne's expression was unreadable. "Glad you came." "I didn't think it was optional, ma'am." "That's what I like about you," Hawthorne said. "You understand duty, even when you don't like the taste of it." Mitchell gestured toward the aircraft. "We're going to a place that technically doesn't exist. Strap in." They flew for hours, windows covered, the hum of the engines filling the silence. When they landed, the air was crisp, mountain-thin. A massive facility lay carved into rock. No signs, no markings, just a concrete mouth leading underground. "Welcome to Raven Point," Mitchell said, "home of the reactivation program." Elena's stomach tightened. Reactivation of what? He looked at her. "Black Talon." The elevator descended deep into the mountain, humming softly. Lights flickered across the walls, security scanners, biometric locks. When the doors opened, the hallway stretched into silence, lined with framed photographs. Men and women in faded uniforms, unnamed but not forgotten. At the end of the corridor stood a plaque. "In honor of those who operatd without recognition." Below it, the black-winged emblem, talons spread wide. Elena felt her breath catch. Her grandfather's mark, perfectly preserved in steel. Hawthorne spoke quietly beside her. "This unit was buried after Vietnam, officially erased. But the world's changed again, Rodriguez. The kind of precision they embodied, it's needed. And you want me to be part of it?" Hawthorne nodded. "Your skills, your restraint. You're not a killer looking for a trigger, you're a conscience that can aim. That's rare." They led her into a briefing room where 5 other soldiers waited, men and women from different branches, each carrying the stillness of people who'd seen too much. Mitchell stood at the head of the table. "You are the first recruits of Black Talon II. You were chosen not for aggression but for judgment. You'll operate where politics can't and treaties won't." He clicked a remote. Satellite images flickered on the screen, an abandoned Soviet facility buried in forest. Codename Winterglass. "We believe it's being reactivated by a rogue collective trading in stolen weapons technology. Your mission is reconnaissance, confirmation, exfiltration, nothing more. But if compromised—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Elena's hand tightened on her pen. She studied enough classified after-action reports to know what "if compromised" really meant. The next weeks blurred into preparation. New equipment, silent communication systems, cold weather drills. The team trained together, testing trust through exhaustion and silence. There was Captain Rourke, ex-Marine, Lieutenant Vasquez, cyberops, Sergeant Hale, demolitions, and Sarah Chen, reassigned at Elena's request. "You pulled strings for me," Sarah said one night as they checked gear. "I just asked for someone I trusted." Sarah smirked. "Careful, that sounds almost sentimental." "Don't get used to it." They deployed under cloud cover, parachuting into a valley shrouded in snow and mist. The forest swallowed them whole. Each breath formed ghosts in the air. Elena took point, her rifle balanced, eyes scanning the tree line. Every sound, the creak of ice, the snap of branches, felt amplified in the stillness. Hours later they reached the objective, a derelict compound half buried under frost. No lights, no guards. "Too quiet," Hale muttered. "Eyes up," Elena whispered. "Movement at the north wall." Through her scope she caught flickers of heat signatures, 3, maybe 4. 2 organized to be scavengers. Rourke signaled a split approach. "Chen, Rodriguez overwatch, the rest with me." Elena and Sarah climbed a ridge overlooking the compound. The air was thin, biting. Through the scope, Alina tracked her teammates as they advanced between frozen vehicles. Then she saw it, an insignia painted faintly on one of the storage crates, a black bird, wings spread. Her breath hitched. "Sarah," she whispered, "zoom on crate C12. Sarah adjusted her lens. "That's your grandfather's unit mark." "No," Alina said softly. "That's this unit's mark, but it's not supposed to be here." A cold realization crept over her. Whoever occupied this facility already knew Black Talon had been revived. Moments later, gunfire erupted inside. "Contact," Rourke's voice snapped through comms. "Ambush multiple hostiles." Alina's instincts took over. She fired once, twice, clean shots that silenced two figures on the ridge. Sarah relayed coordinates. North flank moving, 3 hostiles closing. Alina pivoted, breath steady, heart silent. The world shrank to the crosshair. Each squeeze was a choice, not a reflex. Minutes later, the forest went still again. "Status?" she asked. Rourke's voice came back ragged. 2 wounded, 1 KIA. Intel recovered, pulling out. "Copy, we're covering." When the team regrouped, Hale was limping, blood soaking through his sleeve. The case he carried was marked classified, U.S. Army ARCHIVES. Alina stared at it. "That shouldn't exist out here." Hale grimaced. "Whatever it is, someone wanted it badly enough to kill for it." Back at Raven Point, the debriefing was closed door. Only Hawthorne, Mitchell, and Alina were present. Hawthorne opened the recovered case. Inside were weathered folders, decades old, stamped with red lettering, Black Talon/Archive Vietnam. Mitchell's face hardened. "These are original mission files. They were supposed to be destroyed in 1975. He handed one to Alina. Her grandfather's name was on the cover. She opened it slowly. Inside were field reports, handwritten notes, and a single photograph. 4 men standing in jungle mist, rifles slung low. Her grandfather was second from the left. The man beside him, Mitchell. Alina looked up stunned. "You were there." Mitchell exhaled. "Yes, Carlos Rodriguez saved my life more than once. He also saved them." He pointed to the other 2 soldiers in the photo. "Except one of them didn't die when the record said he did." "What do you mean?" Hawthorne tapped the folder. "The man on the far right, Major Henry Voss. He disappeared during the final operation. Intelligence now suggests he resurfaced years later under another name, possibly connected to the facility you just raided." Alina's pulse quickened. "You're saying one of my grandfather's teammates became the enemy?" "We're saying someone's using Black Talon's legacy to build something dangerous," Hawthorne said quietly. "And you may be the only one who can help us uncover why." In the days that followed, Alina pored over the files, tracing handwriting, coordinates, mission codes. She recognized her grandfather's meticulous notes, precise angles, wind patterns, observations. But one margin note froze her. "Voss is changing. Too many shadows, not enough light." She stared at the words until they blurred. Sarah found her in the archive room hours later, eyes red, hands shaking slightly. "Hey," Sarah said softly, "you haven't slept." "I'm reading my grandfather's thoughts," Alina whispered, "and realizing I never really knew him." Sarah sat beside her. "Maybe that's the point. Maybe knowing everything would have broken you before you could carry it." Alina looked up, tears glinting. "He trained me for this world without ever telling me what it cost him." Sarah reached over, covering her hand. "Then maybe you get to end it differently." 2 weeks later, orders came down. Operation Talon Echo. Objective: locate and confirm Henry Voss. Alina was assigned as team lead. Mitchell would advise remotely. Hawthorne authorized full discretion. Before departure, Mitchell handed her a small metal tag, weathered, etched with the Blackwing emblem. "Your grandfather," he said, "recovered after his final tour. Keep it close. It has a way of reminding you who you are when you forget. Elena closed her fingers around it. The metal was cold, heavy, alive with memory. Their transport skimmed low over gray seas, heading toward the coordinates. Below, cliffs rose from mist like broken teeth. As the engines droned, Elena looked out the window, the tag warm in her palm. If her grandfather's friend had become the ghost they were chasing, then this wasn't just a mission. It was closure wrapped in danger. Sarah leaned over. "You ready for this?" "No," Elena said honestly, "but I'm prepared." Sarah smiled. "That's the difference between courage and confidence." They jumped at dawn. The wind screamed past as the ocean rushed up to meet them. Parachutes snapped open and they landed hard on the rocky shore. Ahead, an old fortress stood against the fog, its walls cracked, windows dark. As they approached, the first door creaked open on its own. Inside, dust danced in shafts of pale light, and on the far wall, carved into crumbling concrete, was the same black-winged symbol, freshly painted. Sarah whispered, "He's expecting us." Elena's heartbeat slowed. Her hands were steady, but her mind spun. Why resurrect a ghost that was never meant to return? Deep inside the fortress, a faint echo carried through the halls, footsteps, deliberate, unhurried. Elena raised her rifle, moving silently toward the sound. And as she turned the corner, a voice came from the shadows, calm, aged, unmistakably human. "So," the man said, stepping into the light, gray-haired and cold-eyed, "they finally sent the granddaughter." Elena froze. "Major Voss," she breathed. He smiled faintly. "Your grandfather trained me before you were born. Pity he didn't live to see how well you inherited his aim. Sometimes the past doesn't rest in graves. It waits for blood that still remembers." Why did his voice sound so calm, so ordinary when it carried the weight of ghosts? Major Henry Voss stepped into the light like a man returning from a grave that never fully closed. His uniform was civilian now, black turtleneck, gray tactical vest, but the way he moved, the precision in each step, spoke of military discipline long ingrained. Elena kept her rifle raised, hands where I can see them. Voss didn't flinch. "You won't fire." "Try me." "You have his eyes," he said quietly. Carlos's eyes, focused, searching for the truth even when it hurts. Her breath hitched, not because of the words, but because he said her grandfather's name like it still mattered. "Why did you use the black Talon symbol?" she demanded. "You stole it." Voss tilted his head. "Stole? No, preserved. The original Talon was erased by politicians who couldn't stomach the truth. I kept its purpose alive. By building an arms network. By preparing for what's coming," he said simply. Elena frowned. "What's coming?" Voss gestured toward the far wall, where a long table was covered with documents, maps, and encrypted drives. "Everything your leaders refuse to see, a new kind of war, fought in silence. They want pawns. I'm building people who can think." "By turning soldiers into ghosts," she asked bitterly. "Ghosts get remembered longer than flags." He smiled faintly. "You know it, even if you won't admit it. Every order you've followed, every shot you've taken, do you even know who you were working for? Do you still believe you were serving truth?" Elena hesitated, the silence stretching. "I serve my country," she said finally. Voss shook his head. "You serve an illusion." Carlos saw it too, near the end. He knew they'd never let soldiers like us live long enough to question why. He took a slow step forward. "He told me once, if the day ever comes when truth and loyalty collide, aim carefully." Her heart pounded. "Don't quote him to me." "Why not?" Voss asked softly. "He was my brother before he was your blood, and he died because he refused to lie for them." The words hit like a shot. "What did you just say?" Voss met her gaze. "They didn't tell you how he died, did they?" Her voice was tight. "He died in combat," field reports said. Classified engagement, hostile fire, Voss finished. Yes, I've read the same lie. He reached slowly into his vest pocket, pulling out an old photograph. 4 men, jungle behind them, young faces hardened by war. After that photo was taken, he said, Command sent us on a cleanup operation to silence local witnesses who'd seen too much during a botched extraction. Carlos refused, said we weren't executioners. He tried to pull us out. They branded him insubordinate. He looked up, eyes cold. They sent another team after us, not the enemy, our own. Elena's breath caught. That's not possible. It's fact, Voss said quietly. He was shot in the back while trying to radio for evacuation. They called it crossfire. She shook her head. No, you're lying. I buried him myself. The room spun. Her grandfather, the man who'd taught her to hold her breath between heartbeats, to find calm in chaos, murdered by the system he'd served. She steadied her weapon again, her voice trembling. If that's true, then why are you here, hiding in shadows? You could have gone public. Voss's expression hardened. Public truth dies fast, but legacy endures. I built something stronger. I found others like us betrayed and forgotten. I gave them purpose. You built a mercenary network, she snapped. I built insurance, he countered, for when the world decides it no longer needs its conscience. Sarah's voice crackled suddenly over comms. Elena, we've got movement outside. Multiple signatures approaching, not ours. Elena didn't look away from Voss. How many? Half a dozen, maybe more. They're not local militia, too organized. Voss smiled faintly. Ah, right on schedule. What did you do? She hissed. I didn't call them, he said. You did, the moment you stepped off that plane. Raven Point has trackers embedded in your gear. You think Hawthorne would send her new prodigy here without a leash? Elena's pulse quickened. She switched comms. Sarah, fall back to position echo. Stay low, do not engage. Copy that. She turned back to Voss. You're coming with me now. Voss's voice stayed calm. You don't understand. They'll kill us both before we make it out. Then move. They slipped through the lower corridors of the fortress as the first explosions echoed above. The walls shook with the sound of suppressed gunfire, clean, efficient, military. Extraction team, Voss murmured, your own. Keep moving, Elena said. She led him through narrow halls, her mind racing. Every instinct screamed to distrust him, and yet something in his eyes told her he was right. At the stairwell, a figure appeared in the smoke, uniformed, face hidden behind a tactical mask. Elena froze. The soldier raised a weapon. Without thinking, Voss shoved her aside and fired first. The man dropped instantly. See, Voss said, voice grim, they're not here to rescue. Elena stared at the fallen soldier. The patch on his shoulder bore no flag, no rank, just a symbol she recognized. A black wing. Her breath faltered. They reactivated the name. Voss nodded and redefined it. They're not the Black Talon anymore. They're the executioners of it. They reached the basement vault, a massive steel door standing half open. Inside, computer terminals glowed faintly, screens scrolling with data, coordinates, profiles, lists of operations labeled Echo, Mirage, Dustline. Elena skimmed one screen. The dates ran up to last month. These are active missions. Of course, Voss said. The new Talon isn't precision anymore, it's preemption. Strike first, question later. She turned on him. So what are you doing here, exposing them? I'm finishing what Carlos started, he said. He wanted the truth out, proof that Talon was used to cover black contracts. I collected it, but I couldn't deliver it without proof they'd come for it. He gestured toward the ceiling, where gunfire echoed closer. Now you have that proof. By using me. Voss's expression softened. By trusting you, he would have. Sarah's voice came again, urgent and breathless. Elena, we're pinned. Extraction's blown. two down, I can't hold them. Alina gritted her teeth. Copy, hold your position, I'm on my way. She turned to Voss. We're leaving now. He nodded, picking up a drive from the table and slipping it into his pocket. Then we take the truth with us. They moved fast, dodging through crumbling corridors as the firefight intensified. Bullets sparked off the walls. Smoke filled the air. They burst outside into the frozen courtyard. Snow whirled, fog thick as breath. Sarah crouched behind a low wall, returning fire. When she saw Alina, relief flickered across her face until she noticed Voss beside her. You brought him. He's coming with us. Are you out of your mind? Alina didn't answer. She was already scanning for the extraction signal. The helicopter was inbound, its rotors echoing faintly through the mist. Then a shot rang out. Voss staggered, hand pressed to his side. No, Alina shouted, catching him as he fell. He smiled faintly, blood staining his shirt. Guess I won't see how it ends. Stay with me, she said, voice breaking. He reached into his vest and pulled out a small metal case, forcing it into her hand. Inside, everything. Names, files, the truth he died for. Hold on, we're almost. He grabbed her wrist, his voice a whisper. Tell them what he really was, Alina. Not a killer, a keeper of conscience. And then he went still. The helicopter landed hard, snow whipping through the air. Sarah hauled Alina aboard, shouting over the noise. We've got to go. Alina stared down at the fortress as it burned beneath them, the symbol of the black Talon glowing faintly in the flames. For a long time, neither woman spoke. Finally, Sarah touched her shoulder. We got out, that's what matters. Alina looked at the case in her lap, her reflection trembling in the metal. No, she said softly, that's what they'll say, but it's not what's true. Back at Raven Point, the debrief was short and sterile. Hawthorne listened without expression as Alina described the ambush, the facility, Voss's death. When Alina mentioned the drive, Hawthorne's eyes flickered. Where is it now? Alina paused, destroyed in the crossfire. Hawthorne's jaw tightened. Unfortunate. She dismissed her with a curt nod. But as Alina walked out of the room, she felt the weight of the drive hidden inside her jacket. That night, alone in her quarters, she plugged it into her encrypted terminal. The screen flickered to life, files, reports, audio logs. Among them, one labeled simply, CR Personal Recording. She opened it. Her grandfather's voice filled the room, worn and steady. If you're hearing this, I'm gone. They'll tell you it was an accident. Don't believe them. I stayed because someone has to remember what right feels like, even when it hurts. They'll use our name again one day, maybe through you. When they do, make sure it still means what it used to. A Talon doesn't grab for power. It protects what can't defend itself. Alina sat motionless, tears tracing down her face. Outside, the night was quiet. The stars burned like silent witnesses. She whispered to the screen, her voice trembling but certain. I'll remember. Sometimes, truth doesn't come from the loudest voice, but from the one that refuses to go silent. Why does the truth weigh more than a rifle? The drive sat on her desk like a living thing, small, cold, humming faintly with the pulse of secrets too heavy for one person to hold. Alina stared at it for hours, the soft green light blinking in rhythm with her heartbeat. She hadn't slept since the mission. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Voss falling, the sound of his breath fatting. His final words tell them what he really was. Her grandfather's voice haunted her too, from that old recording. They'll use our name again one day, maybe through you. And they had. She was the new Black Talon, but now she knew what that truly meant. The file directory was enormous, thousands of documents, mission reports, internal memos, each folder a layer of deceit. One in particular caught her eye, Project Aegis, Oversight Division. She opened it. The first document made her blood run cold. It listed dozens of covert operations, carried out under Black Talon authorization, but none of them signed off by Congress or command. Targeted strikes on civilians, cover-ups disguised as counter-terror operations. Each line felt like a wound carved into the idea of service. She whispered, "What did they do to your name, Abuelo?" Scrolling through, she found another folder marked Phase Renewal, Successor Candidates. Her own name was listed, Rodriguez, Alina M., alongside personnel notes describing her as psychologically stable, morally conflicted, suitable for integration. Integration into what? She muttered. The answer came in the next paragraph. Subject demonstrates traits consistent with conscience-based control. May serve as a stabilizing public face for the renewed Black Talon initiative. They hadn't chosen her for her marksmanship. They'd chosen her because she'd make them look clean. A tool with empathy, a weapon disguised as humanity. The room felt colder. She stood packing, her breath fogging against the glass window. Outside, Raven Point slept, floodlights sweeping over snow and silence. She pressed her forehead against the glass. What do I do with this? If she went public, the exposure could tear through the military's credibility, destroy entire careers, maybe destabilize alliances. But if she stayed quiet, she'd become exactly what they wanted her to be. Her hand clenched into a fist. You told me not to stay silent, Abuelo. You told me to aim carefully. But there was no clear target now, only shades of betrayal hiding behind flags. The next morning she was summoned. General Hawthorne's assistant met her at the door. The general wants to see you, now. Alina entered the office, sterile, immaculate, every detail arranged with control. Hawthorne stood by the window, back turned, hands clasped behind her. Without turning, she said, "You look tired, Rodriguez." "I am." "Understandable. You've been through quite the ordeal." Alina said nothing. Hawthorne turned then, eyes sharp as glass. "You brought back more than a story from that fortress." It wasn't a question. Alina forced her face still. "We lost good people, that's what I brought back." Hawthorne smiled faintly. "You've learned to deflect, that's progress." She walked around her desk, lowering her voice. "Let's not waste time. Voss had something dangerous. You recovered it, didn't you?" Alina's pulse stayed steady. "If I had, it would have been logged." "I've reviewed your logs." Hawthorne's tone cooled. "They're very clean." A long silence stretched between them. Then Hawthorne leaned closer. "You think you're the first soldier to see the cracks in the system. You think Carlos didn't see them too. He stayed quiet because he understood something you don't. This country survives not on truth, but on control." Alina met her gaze, voice low. "He didn't stay quiet, you just buried what he said." Hawthorne's expression hardened. "Be careful, Lieutenant. The truth doesn't make you righteous. It makes you a liability." Alina stood, jaw tight. "Then I guess I've been a liability my whole life." She turned and walked out before Hawthorne could respond. Outside the office, her hands were trembling not from fear but from clarity. There was no longer a middle ground. If she did nothing, Voss and her grandfather would remain ghosts blamed for the sins of others. If she acted, she'd lose everything, rank, uniform, even her name. But at least she'd still have herself. That night she found Sarah in the training hangar, running solo drills under dim lights. Sarah paused when she saw her. "You look like hell." "I've been promoted," Alina said dryly. Sarah smirked. "Congratulations." Alina handed her a small envelope. "If anything happens to me, take this to the press office in D.C. It's encrypted, but you'll find the password inside." Sarah frowned, opening the envelope slightly. "What is this?" "Proof," Alina said. "Everything they've buried under Black Talon." Sarah froze. "You can't be serious." "I am." "Alina, this isn't whistleblowing. This is suicide." Alina's voice softened. "I know, But if we keep pretending we don't see it, then we're no better than them. Sarah's jaw clenched. There's another way. You could leak it quietly, through the back channels, make it look like an accident. Alina shook her head. No, it has to come from someone who signs their name. She turned to leave. Sarah caught her arm. Then at least don't do it alone. Alina smiled faintly. You already did enough. You believed me when no one else did. She walked back to her quarters, mind steady, resolve iron. Every step echoed like a countdown. Inside, she removed her tags, her sidearm, her insignia. All the symbols that had once meant honor, now hollow metal reminders of obedience. She placed them carefully on the table beside the drive. Then she opened her terminal. The cursor blinked. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. Send file right arrow Global Defense Oversight Archive, Media Channels, Encrypted Network. One keystroke would change everything. She hesitated not from doubt but from memory. Her grandfather's voice again, faint in her head. Aim carefully. She exhaled, I am, and pressed send. The next morning, the world began to fracture. Headlines flooded encrypted networks. Leaked files reveal unsanctioned Black Talon operations. The story spread like wildfire through military circles. Denials, statements, panic. Raven Point went into lockdown. Alina was summoned again, but this time 2 MPs were waiting at her door. You're wanted for questioning, one said. She didn't resist. They escorted her to the underground detention wing. Interrogators took turns, each trying to intimidate, manipulate, bargain. She said nothing. One of them finally slammed the folder shut. You think this makes you a hero? Alina looked up slowly. No, it makes me human. Days blurred together in isolation. No sunlight, no sound but her own heartbeat. And then one morning, the door opened. Sarah stood there, civilian clothes, eyes tired but burning with something fierce. They released you? Alina asked, surprised. Sarah nodded. Public pressure. Someone leaked the leaks to the world. They couldn't contain it. Hawthorne resigned yesterday. Mitchell's under review. Alina's chest loosened, though her expression stayed calm. So it worked. Sarah handed her a folded newspaper. The headline read, Black Talon whistleblower sparks global inquiry. Truth behind the badge. Below it, a small photo, grainy, taken from a distance of Alina walking out of the hangar the day she was arrested. No name listed, just the caption, Anonymous Soldier. She smiled faintly. Anonymous, I like that. Sarah tilted her head. What now? Alina looked past her toward the horizon visible through the glass doors, snow melting on distant peaks. I'm going home, she said softly. Montana. Maybe plant something for once instead of carrying a rifle. Sarah grinned. You think they'll leave you alone? They'll try, Alina said, but ghosts don't scare me anymore. Weeks later, the wind rolled across the open fields like memory returning home. Alina walked through her grandfather's old property, grass grown wild, barn half collapsed. She stopped at the shooting post he'd built decades ago. The wood was splintered, faded. She knelt, tracing the initials CR carved into the beam. Then she added 2 more beneath them, ER. Her hand lingered on the letters. You were right, she whispered. Strength isn't silence, it's what comes after. From her pocket, she pulled the small metal tag Mitchell had given her, the Blackwing emblem glinting faintly in the sun. She hung it on a nail by the post, where the wind could reach it. No flag, no ceremony, just legacy. That evening she sat on the porch, the horizon painted gold. Her phone buzzed, an encrypted message from an unknown number, just one line. You aimed carefully, JM. She smiled faint, proud, tired. For the first time, peace didn't feel like absence. It felt like understanding. The next morning, news anchors debated reforms, oversight, and accountability. But somewhere between the noise, One line from her grandfather's old recording replayed in her mind, soft, steady, timeless. A Talon doesn't grab for power. It protects what can't defend itself. She whispered it aloud, watching the sun break over the hills. Then maybe it's finally done. Sometimes silence isn't surrender. It's the sound of truth taking root. Why does peace feel heavier than war? Years had passed since the firestorm of headlines, tribunals, and resignations. The name Black Talon had faded from the news, filed away beneath new scandals and shifting governments. But in places that didn't exist on maps, the story of what one soldier did, the woman who refused silence, was whispered like a code. Elena Rodriguez had disappeared from the public eye. No photos, no interviews. Officially, she was discharged under review. Unofficially, she'd simply vanished. But legends rarely stay buried. The camera of memory opens on Montana again. Endless fields, the smell of rain in soil, and a quiet farmhouse where the world no longer demanded anything. Elena sat on her porch, gray now streaking through her hair. The same rifle leaned against the wall beside her. It hadn't fired in years. She lived simply, no uniforms, no rank. Just a woman who once carried too many ghosts and finally learned to let them rest. Every morning, she'd walk the edge of the property where her grandfather's post still stood. The metal tag with the Black Talon insignia swung gently in the wind, sunlight glinting off it like a heartbeat that refused to die. Sometimes she'd stop there, touch the tag and whisper, still protecting. It was her quiet ritual, her way of remembering without reliving. One late autumn afternoon, a black SUV rolled up the dirt road, government plates. Dust curled in the air as it stopped near the gate. Elena's dog barked once, then went quiet as two figures stepped out, one older, one young. The older woman removed her sunglasses. "Colonel Sarah Chen," Elena said softly, recognizing her old teammate. "Didn't think I'd find you this far off the grid," Sarah replied with a smile that didn't hide the weight in her eyes. "You found me because you know where ghosts go when they're done fighting," Elena said. The younger figure approached, stiff in posture, maybe 23, fresh-cut hair, still wearing the nerves of someone new to service. She hesitated before saluting. "Ma'am, it's an honor." Elena looked at her carefully. "Don't salute me, kid. I'm not anyone's superior anymore." The young woman lowered her hand awkwardly. I've read about you, in the training archives. They say you." Elena cut in gently. "They say a lot of things, half of them wrong." Sarah stepped forward. "We're not here for ceremony. We're here because things are changing again. They're rebuilding the oversight division from scratch. The brass want to use the name Black Talon again, but differently this time." Elena's eyes narrowed. "Differently how?" "As a doctrine, not a unit," Sarah said. "Precision with accountability, force guided by conscience. They're calling it the Rodriguez Protocol." Elena froze. "No." Sarah smiled faintly. "Yes, you leaked what they tried to bury. You set the standard. They're rewriting training to remind soldiers that silence isn't loyalty, it's fear." Elena looked away toward the horizon. "You think names fix things?" "No," Sarah said quietly. "But they can remind people who paid the price when others forgot." The young cadet stepped forward again, hesitant. "Ma'am, they made us study your grandfather's field notes in ethics class. His last line was carved into the academy wall." Elena turned. "Which line?" The cadet straightened. "A Talon doesn't grab for power. It protects what can't defend itself." For a moment, Elena couldn't speak. Her eyes shimmered with something that wasn't quite pride and wasn't quite sorrow, something between them, like gratitude wrapped in ache. She exhaled slowly. "He'd have liked that." Sarah placed a folder on the porch table. "There's one more thing. We found this during declassification. Thought you should have it." Inside was a letter, aged, yellowed, signed in faded ink. "Carlos Rodriguez." Elena unfolded it carefully. The words were written in her grandfather's unmistakable handwriting. "If this ever reaches you, it means you've seen the same darkness I did. I won't tell you how to fight it. You'll find your own way. Just remember, integrity doesn't roar. It whispers. And that whisper, if you let it, can still move mountains." Her hand trembled slightly as she folded the letter back. "Thank you," she murmured. Sarah touched her shoulder. "We're hosting a small symposium next month for the new recruits. We'd like you to speak." Elena smiled faintly. "You want a ghost to teach the living." Sarah's tone softened. "You're not a ghost. You're the reason we're still breathing." That night after they left, Elena sat on the porch long after sunset. The air was crisp, the stars sharp and unflinching. She thought of the faces she'd lost: Voss, Tors, Mitchell, her grandfather, all threads in the same torn flag of history. And then she thought of the young cadet's eyes, earnest, bright, unbroken. Maybe the world wasn't perfect. Maybe it never would be. But someone somewhere had learned to question orders that didn't make sense. Someone had learned that courage wasn't noise, it was clarity. She picked up her journal, the same one she'd carried through missions, rain and isolation, and wrote, "Legacy isn't about medals or ranks. It's about the silence that teaches after the shouting ends." Months passed. At the military academy, in a small lecture hall lit by afternoon sun, cadets filled the rows in uniform. At the front of the room stood a young instructor, holding a datapad. "Today," she said, "we study the Black Talon doctrine, one of the most controversial yet pivotal chapters in recent military ethics." She paused, looking around the room. "Most of you know the official story, but there's an unofficial one too. It begins with a recruit who once asked for a rifle and was laughed at." The cadets smiled faintly, some leaning forward. "She wasn't the fastest or the strongest," the instructor continued, "but she carried something the others, a mark on her hand and a question in her heart. That question changed everything." She tapped the screen. A photograph appeared, grainy, monochrome. A young Elena Rodriguez standing at a training range, expression unreadable, rifle steady. "Her name," the instructor said softly, "was never supposed to be known, but her courage redefined what honor means when no one's watching." Silence filled the hall, not reverent, alive. One cadet in the back raised his hand. "Ma'am, what happened to her?" The instructor smiled faintly. "She went home and stayed there, because some battles end when you finally choose peace." Back in Montana, Elena spent her days tending the soil, fixing fences, writing letters she never mailed. The old rifle stayed by the porch, unused. Sometimes neighbors would visit, bringing stories from the outside world, the reforms, the new cadets, the plaques. She'd listen, smile politely, and change the subject to weather or crops. But when they left, she'd glance toward the ridge where her grandfather once taught her to breathe before pulling a trigger. That ridge was quiet now. Grass grew over the dirt path, hiding the footprints of a past that had finally stopped chasing her. One evening, as the sun dipped low, she walked to the ridge for the first time in months. The air smelled of rain and cedar. She sat on the old wooden bench, the tag still swinging gently in the breeze. "I heard they brought the name back," she said aloud. "Used it for something good this time." The wind rustled the grass, soft and approving. "Guess you were right, Abuelo. Dignity doesn't speak, it acts." She closed her eyes, feeling the wind trace across her face. For a moment she could almost hear his voice again, calm and certain. "Aim carefully." And she smiled. Somewhere far away in a new generation of training fields, cadets carried rifles stamped with a tiny emblem, two wings spread around a single star. Underneath, etched in fine print, 4 words read, "For those who remember why." No one spoke her name aloud. It wasn't needed. Because every time a soldier hesitated, not out of fear but out of conscience, every time someone chose restraint over rage, mercy over pride, her story lived again. Not in headlines, not in history books, but in the quiet precision of those who understood that courage and compassion were never opposites. They were twins born of the same heart. That night, as the stars lit the Montana sky, Elena sat beside the old post one last time. She whispered softly, "You can rest now, Abuelo. The mark still means what you meant it to." Then she lifted her head toward the horizon, where dawn waited unseen, and whispered the final line that once began her story, now redefined by everything she'd lived. They laughed when she requested a rifle. A pause. But no one laughs at the silence she left behind. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts.